than you've described in your report, frankly. I know you've been a heroin addict since you were 16, and as urged by defense counsel, it can be argued that your heroin addiction is a major component of what happened here. So those are the mitigating factors. But there are some factors on the other side of the ledger. Well, clearly you are a heroin addict. You've failed out of drug treatment court on multiple occasions. There is some record in the reports indicating that you didn't really want to go through drug treatment. This in regard to your experiences with Joshua Murray and with Janessa. On one occasion, I think you entered drug treatment but left after one visit. So it's difficult for me to accept, to some degree, that your heroin addiction had anything to do with what happened here. I have heroin addicts come into my court on a regular basis, usually charged with burglary in the second degree or grand larceny. I can't think of one of them who was violent or they have committed violent acts. No one has said to me, my heroin addiction caused me to kill or to hurt or to injure. Here you are convicted of killing a 3-year-old child. And with all due respect to counsel, that wasn't the heroin, that was a calculated act of violence, one in which all probability, given the bruising on the child about her body, had been inflicted prior to the blow to the abdomen. Heroin had nothing to do, certainly, with your hiding Brooke's injuries, in lying to Robin Rayom that you're going to the hospital, and applying makeup to her to hide the injuries, and lying to the people at the party as to what was wrong with her, trying to convince Michael Stagels not to take her to the hospital. Those were the acts of a person fully in control of her faculties, it appeared to me, and in control of her decision-making processes. As you yourself said, once you take heroin, you are able to think rationally and function. You are off to the races, I think was the phrase you used to describe how you feel once you get high. If heroin caused you to act compulsively, in other words, the heroin made you do it, I would note that in the drug courts that we have here and across the state of New York, into which the state pours millions of dollars, is a waste of money. Because the entire premise of the drug courts is that with help, a person can beat their addiction, with help and with the will of the person. But if, as you say, it is too powerful to beat, then our drug courts really are wasting their money. But I don't think that's the case. There was a lack of will here, and that factors into the sentence I'm imposing. Now let me look at the nature of the crime itself. A child's murder, again, is a paradigm of its age. Few things shock a community or galvanize the attention of a community like the beating death of a child. Not for nothing has it been written that for a person who causes harm to a child, it would be better for that person to have a millstone hung around their neck and to be flung into the sea. I too look at that picture of Brooke standing next to, of all things, a Christmas tree, only a week before her death. And I think, as I'm sure everyone in her family who loved her thought, here's an image of hope. Here's an image of the future. Here it maybe is the one who can end a cycle of addiction, of mental illness, of living in cockroach-infested households, who can grow up happy and full of optimism. I don't know how else to explain what the death of a child does to a community, and more importantly, to her family and to her loved ones. And the act committed by you, perhaps like all such deaths, is despicable. That's the nature of depraved indifference murder. There's no other way to describe it. Not only that you would strike the child, but that you allowed the child to suffer severe pain for so long, frustrating the attempts of persons to intervene and help. And then you attempt to convince Michael not to take her to the hospital. And as I said at the verdict, you show upon learning of her death, at that time at least, Ms. Bell, and I'm not denying that you show remorse now, okay? At that time, virtually no remorse or grief, but rather are preoccupied about what this means for you, at least long enough until you can think of an alternate story, that it was Michael who inflicted the injuries, a story which you repeated here on the stand, and which, frankly, in my determination, was an outright lie, as was so much of your testimony. Now, I reviewed comparable cases. I want to see how this stands up next to what courts have weighed in on. and the sentences handed down in those cases. And there are worse ones, if it can be imagined. People versus Mitchell in 2001. A 2-year-old child's head was banged against a wall multiple times, fracturing her skull. The injuries were not reported immediately. The child was suffering, and when medical personnel showed up, the defendant claimed the child had fallen off the couch. Now, that sentence was 20 years to life. People versus Dickerson. Parents of Natalie Lockwood had systematically starved their 5-year-old child so that when police showed up and saw her in the crib at age 5, she weighed 15 pounds and looked like a skeleton. People versus Quinones, a 1989 case. Defendant had viciously beat a 3-year-old child, resulting in multiple contusions of the abdomen, face, scalp, scrotum, extremities, and intestines, bound the body and threw it into the East River. That was 25 years. And in what is the closest analogy to this case, a case out of the 4th Department, in 1995, People versus Best. People's proof established that repeated severe beatings inflicted by the defendant caused large open wounds on the boy's legs and buttocks. The Streptococcus bacteria entered the body through those wounds, resulting in septicemic infection or blood poisoning. The proof established that the septicemia led to a weakening of the boy's physical and mental condition, and ultimately to the boy's loss of consciousness and death. It was clear that the beatings of the boy and the failure to obtain medical attention caused his physical deterioration and pain. The boy was so sickened by septicemia that he vomited and was so weakened that he was unable to expel his vomit, causing his death by asphyxiation. And that was, again, a 1995 4th Department case, and the sentence there was 25 years to life. So let me get back to the purposes to be served by a sentence. And again, the language in all these cases is focused on the helpless nature of the child, the vulnerability of the child, and the horror of the thought of a child having inflicted upon it this nature of suffering, which certainly Brooke suffered. I get back to the statute itself and the penal law, that the purpose of the penal law and of a sentence is to provide for an appropriate public response to particular offenses, including consideration of the consequences of the offense for the victim, including the victim's family and the community, and to ensure the public's safety by preventing the commission of offenses through the deterrent influence of the sentences authorized, the rehabilitation of those convicted, the promotion of a successful reentry into society, and confinement when required in the interest of public protection, and again, for retribution. I mentioned again that murder is a paradigm of its age. And I say that because of my awareness of the community interest in this case. And the community's interest in seeing the sentence in this case. If anything weighs upon me, it's your daughter. I don't know that I saw much of a relationship with Bentley, but at least with Janessa. I also know, though, that throughout your heroin addiction and your involvement with Joshua Murray, that daughter was exposed to things that a child should never have to see. Their mother shooting up the father's arm, father shooting up in the mother's arm, sleeping in abandoned cars and abandoned buildings, going on drug buys with you. And I have to be honest with you, Ms. Bell, I'm sure that your daughter's going to have a relationship with you during your time in prison, but the best thing for your daughter would be to be in another household for the rest of her life. I don't deny anybody, I've never denied anybody a hope for redemption. And I have to be honest with you, I think that you can achieve that. We call them correctional facilities now. They used to be called penitentiaries for a reason, because they were places of penitence and to get better. And I don't deny that is going to happen with you. So I leave nobody in my court without that hope. However, when I take into account the consideration of the consequences of the offense for the victim and the victim's family and the community, I am compelled to impose the maximum sentence of 25 years to life on count 1, on the murder in the second degree, and on count 2, manslaughter, 20 years in the state correctional facility, plus 5 years of post-release supervision. I impose a mandatory surcharge of $325, plus the mandatory DNA fee of $50. And that is the sentence of the court. Mr. Kasparek, first of all, I'm going to sign an order declaring that Ms. Bell is a poor person for purposes of appeal. I'm going to sign that order now. And if you want to make an application with regard to the collection of surcharges, you can do that now.
Here's my application that deputy state judge until such time as Ms. Bell is.
The sentences are concurrent, which I didn't say. I am going to reduce the surcharges to a judgment and defer their collection until after her release from custody. That is the sentence of the court. Counselor